Well, welcome to the Synergistic Horsemanship channel. And we're going to go ahead and get started with first, if you just want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me. I'm really excited. So, who am I and what do I do? So, I'm originally from Germany, and I came here in the US in 1995, and the horses were a big reason for that. We had a boarding facility in Germany. We had our own horses. We imported a quarter horse mare that had a baby, and Germany is just really crowded, and it's hard to have horses, you know? And so we decided to take this huge big step to come from Germany to the US. And we started out with having a real working cattle cow camp up in the mountains at 9,000 feet. It was a 60,000 acre ranch, and just lots of history there. We had a real old cow camp from the early 1900s, and there was a wood stove in the kitchen and a propane, what do you call it, refrigerator, and the pump for the water. So it was very, very rustic. And so we would take people out to repair fences and move cattle, and we did that for a few years. And then we started a computer store, which was not what my forte was, but my son's father loved that. And so we did two things at the same time, and it just didn't work out. And so we concentrated on the computer store, and I kind of put my horse stuff on hold. And after my divorce, I just felt really passionate to get back into horses. And so that brings us to this whole Genuine Connections horsemanship that I'm doing now. I was for a while certified natural horsemanship instructor, and really wanted to teach my own stuff, so that I can teach and do what I want to do, and that I don't have to teach what I don't want to teach, and that I don't have to do what I don't want to do. I just wanted to be me. And I also had found for my students and for myself that I had reached like a plateau, and there was no give, right? I mean, I passed my level 4, and you know, my horses could do all these things, and nevertheless there was something missing, right? And so I started searching and searching, and really came up with like 4 principles when it comes to the perspective of training horses, what wasn't working for me. And the other thing that had happened was, well, way back in Germany, I started out with, as a kid, in a regular riding school, and the horses were in stalls, and the horses were partially tied up in stands. And you know, I didn't know all that much about horses when I started out, but nevertheless, you know, I didn't like that. And so when I got my own horses in Germany, I was able to participate in a study from the Technical University in Munich, and they were looking at how to help local farmers to add horse boarding to, most likely, to their dairy farms, whether they were either you know, getting out of the dairy business and they had the facilities still and they had the ground, or whether they wanted to add income. And so it was very much looking at, from that perspective, more from an agricultural perspective, but also how to keep horses, what we call in German artgerecht, which is species appropriate. And so back then, I really realized what a huge big difference that made, looking at the horses that were in box stalls and were even tied up in stands. And once they had the opportunity to be in a herd, and was very elaborate, you know, with computer chips on their necks, and it was computerized feeding and everything. And so coming back to here, what I realized was we can apply as much horse psychology as we want. If the horse doesn't have their basic daily foundational needs met, they cannot respond to us, you know, what we would like, what we are dreaming our partner to be like. They literally can't do that because we're not taking care of their foundational needs. And so this is who I am now and what I'm doing. I'm super passionate to fulfill our horses' needs first, so they can be the partner that we're dreaming of. And that leads us into healthy physiology. So their mind and their emotions and their bodies are set up in a way that we can actually wholeheartedly communicate with them. And when we do that, pretty soon we're going to find out that it really is all about how we show up for the horse and what we bring to the table, how they respond. So it's really this circle, but at the same time, it interacts all with each other. And that's what I call genuine connections horsemanship.
Wow, that sounds wonderful. It sounds like you've spent a long time coming to this point of making your genuine connection program. Can you tell us a little bit about the natural horse habitat concept? And I think you explained where that idea came from, but can you tell us a little bit about what you have done with it and what actually is the natural horse habitat?
So the natural horse habitat is a system, and it has 7 ingredients. And these ingredients, I came up with them from a perspective of, are they horse friendly? Are they pocket friendly? Are they environmentally friendly? And are our neighbors gonna love us too, right? Because a lot of times when we're in close quarters with our neighbors, sometimes, you know, horses can cause issues. And so those were my 4, going back to the idea of genuine connect with our horse, with ourselves and others, how we can make that happen so that everybody is happy. And so there are those 7 ingredients. The first one is the trail system, based on the idea that horses, even out in the wild, they kind of use trails. And, you know, now that I moved here to Soulfire Farm in Arizona, and I have 12 irrigated acres, and in the beginning, when we came here, we just turned the horses loose on the big pasture. That's what the previous owner had done. And they immediately started to make their trails. So they have 12 acres available, but here we go. They have those little trails where they go out in the pasture and where they spend their day. And there's definitely a certain pattern to it, where they lay down and where they rest. And of course, you know, we humans have to some extent, you know, an artificial environment set up for them. So where their water is, where their minerals is. And the next thing then comes into play, and I call that play pasture. So the idea of having a multi-use area, because a lot of times we don't have a lot of space, right? I have a friend in California. He's got I think just a little bit over an acre. He has 9 horses, and he has a trail system set up, and that's how he can keep 9 horses on a fairly small acreage. I had in Pagosa Springs 2.24 acres, and probably I would say, you know, an acre or so was the house and the driveway and the garden and all of that. And so my horses were also on just a little bit more than an acre, and you can use the property more efficiently. It makes sense for the horses so that they keep on moving, which is so important, because, you know, as soon as we put our horse, even if we put our horse in a big paddock and we put the hay in, you know, we make it convenient for us humans, we throw the hay over the fence, what do? They stand there. You can tell, you know, where the poop is. It's usually where they're being fed. So this idea that the horse can move. And around the play pastures, multi-use areas, if we're lucky, we have grass, and we can provide, most likely, you know, a dessert for the horse, because most of us don't have the kind of pasture that enables to really feed the horses year round. And then we have horses that have metabolic issues and might not even be able to be on grass a lot. Then that goes into the habitat shelters. Horses don't live in caves. And we humans, we love our cozy barns. And, you know, I mean, I'm the same way. I mean, when I see a beautiful barn, it's a wonderful thing, and it's convenient for us. And the horses are in their stalls, and they're easily accessible, and they can, you know, they can interact with each other, so they can't be bitten and they can't be kicked or anything like that. And so it works for us human, but it really doesn't work so much for the horse, because I have friends and students all the time. Well, my horse, here I am, I built the run-in shelter, I have the barn, and they can go in and out as they please, lucky horses. And what do? It's raining, it's snowing, they stand outside because they don't feel comfortable in the space that we provided for them. So habitat shelters is all about providing shelter, but making it horse friendly. And then natural feeding is all about, I really prefer a very basic, very natural diet for our horses. This pelleted feed, sweet feed, I call that TV dinner for horses. A lot of times it's getting heated up and it's being pressed into form, and then whatever is in the natural ingredients get lost. So then we put it artificially back in there. And I just feel it's the same thing like for us humans. We become more and more aware of how important nutrition for us is. The same thing for horses. Most of the time we have a monoculture when it comes to grass hay, or even, if people feed alfalfa, which I just feed in small amounts. There is not a lot of variety there, so we have nutrients missing. And my friend Greg Hopkins, who is a manure and composting specialist, he also specializes in pasture, and he says a pasture should have 15 to 20 different types of plants. Medicinal plants, even weeds and grasses, different kinds of grasses that support each other, but also support the horse as habitat. So then manure management, that black gold that we can produce if you want to. I see here in Arizona, most people put their manure in the trash can and then it gets hauled off, and it costs a fortune to do that when we would have lots of other opportunities to, compost our manure. That's where the play pastures come into effect. I mean, I have a new workaway student here, and she went out and she was, picking poop, and she came back 4 hours later, and she's like, it took me 4 hours, to run around with a wheelbarrow and get that all on the compost pile. And I said, you know what? When it's around the trail system, I'm my manual manure spreader. I just spread it into the pastures, and it takes me, well, we didn't do it a couple of days. So it would have taken me 45 minutes instead of running back and forth with a wheelbarrow. So that was manure management. That's number 5. And then number 6 is ecological landscaping, which permaculture, I think when you do gardening or landscaping, that comes, kind of close to that, where we observe our property, we see what we have, where the trees are, where we maybe have a pond, where we have shade, where we have windbreak, where we don't have that. Like in Pagosa Springs, I had a flat piece of property that, I said it's flat as a stamp. There was nothing on it. So my most important thing was to create a windbreak for the horses, which first we did with the habitat shelters. And then, we're looking at where can we plant a hedge and trees and stuff to incorporate nature back onto that property. And the last one is natural care, which is this never ending, story of all the wonderful things we can do for our horse. And I really look at things that we as horse owner can do ourselves, like red light therapy, somatics, essential oils, any homeopathics that we can learn about, that we can incorporate, which goes back into natural feeding, because natural care, natural feeding. So those are the 7 ingredients.
Wow, it sounds like a lot. And so what would you say is the minimum amount of property that you could actually create the natural trails and a system like you're doing?
I had, like in Pagosa Springs, what I did was I set up my play pastures the size of a dressage arena, which is 20 by 40 meters, 133 feet by 66, right? I'm doing my math right here. And so if I had a couple horses and I would create a trail system around that, you can make that work. Have a little bit of extra space for the habitat shelters and an area where the horses can hang out. You can make that work. So it doesn't take as much space. I have a student in Phoenix. Her backyard is the trail system. It's literally in a residential neighborhood. It used to be a little, equine horsey neighborhood with tiny little plots for horses, and she's the only one that still has horses, and she has a trail system in her backyard.
So tell me a little bit, or tell us a little bit more about the trail system. What exactly is that?
Yeah. So what we're doing with the trail system, we're mimicking that idea that horses do use trails. And I was just sitting out there a couple of days ago. I'm actually filming for my natural horse habitat course, where I teach people how to create a system like that. And I was sitting on the ground, and coming from Pagosa Springs, you know, where there's snow and ice and cold. It was so amazing. And I was talking about 18 inches, you know, that's all it is, where the horses walk every day out to the pasture. And it's opening up to 12 acres, but they use this one trail on the side of the property that they move into the back, right? And so that's the idea. It's a narrow pathway so that we can maximize our property. Narrow, long trails also encourage the horses to eat. And I personally spread my hay all over that trail system. And so right now in Pagosa Springs, I started out up on the hillside. So horses literally had to single file, you know, it was like 3 feet, and I made sure that I created a funnel, and I had no corners where, you know, nobody can get trapped in the herd if they don't get along all that well. And it literally was a 3 feet path that was going through the trees and the boulders on the hillside. And then, you know, where I could opening it up, I did. In Pagosa Springs, then where I had a flat piece of property, I started out with 15 feet, then reduced it to 10. And here, and if we have an opportunity to plug that in, you know, I have that Google Earth view from Pagosa Springs. It's all in straight rectangular, you know, and 90-degree lines there, because I had the fence already set up to some extent. I just worked with what I had. Here, I want to honor the fact that horses' trails are not straight. They're kind of windy. So I'm using a trail system that's square on the outside. And as I develop the pastures for intense grazing, we're gonna look into making that a winding trail, and then it will be narrower. So I'm setting up a trail right now that's 8 feet. And what I do is I really encourage everybody to watch their property, watch the herd, and look at what's working for them individually. Because if I have a very consistent herd, my horses have been together for years and years. They get along really well. You know, there is no kicking, no biting, no fighting, you know, going on. So I can definitely decrease my pathways. If I have a new herd, first of all, I need to make sure that we integrate horses properly with each other so we don't have any injuries. I know a student of mine in Alabama, her horse got put in a trail system of all places with 10 other horses, and they really hurt him and chased him, and he fell under a fence and really scraped himself up. But that's just the humans not understanding, you know, why would you put one horse in a herd of 10 when he's brand new? You just don't do that. So that's important to know when you have a trail system, that you set it up in a way that works for your herd individually. And if you integrate horses, you do that slowly. Perfect, you know, with the play pastures in the middle. You can separate them. You can get them to know each other over the fence. I love electric fence. Horses don't mess with electric fence. So the injuries are, you know, I have never had a horse get injured on a fence. Lucky me, you know. I hear it all the time. But if you set it up properly, if you get the horse used properly, they just don't mess with the fence. They leave it alone. So temporary fencing, using temporary fencing and giving yourself that idea of, I'm going to experiment. I can start out with a wider trail, and then I can reduce it as necessary, and maybe add more interest to it by planting trees and bushes and so on, you know.
It also seems like this trail system would help the quality of the pasture as well, not just the horses.
Absolutely, yeah. So that idea of letting the pastures rest, doing intense grazing, moving the horses. I move mine every week. Small pastures, intense grazing. I just posted on Facebook an article of all places from Australia. We're here right now with terrible fires they have and the drought that they're facing. And they were showcasing a farmer that had completely destroyed his farm by overgrazing, and through the drought the herd was bigger. They had cattle and sheep. The herd was bigger than the land was supporting, and so now he's doing intense grazing with small pastures. He's doing no more fertilizing. He's doing no more chemical sprays or anything like that. And he literally said his costs have gone down so much that it's hard not to make a profit. And you see, the barren land and the grass that high. So yes, so important that, we take that into account. Absolutely.
Great. Is this one or this one? That one's fine, yeah. This one, yeah. So my next question for you is, not everybody has their own property or access to a natural horse habitat. Can you give some helpful advice for those who have no other choice than to keep their horses in a stable environment?
Yeah. And, it happens all the time. I had to board my horses, and sometimes we just got to do what we got to do or what's available to us. So I encourage everybody to just take inventory of the situation that you currently have. I have my student and intern, Julie, in Phoenix. The first barn that she was at, she made a decision that her horse was not properly taken care of and she needed to move. It just wasn't working out. And sometimes we might have to make a decision like that. However, the current barn that she is at, it's a typical Arizona barn. It's basically just a roof with stalls, and it's pipe fencing. And they have a large outdoor arena, and they have a couple pens that are attached to the outdoor arena. And so she came to my place in Pagosa Springs for a week, and she looked at my setup, and then she had to go home. And so she had the opportunity to observe what her horse was doing on the natural horse habitat system that I had in Pagosa Springs, and we saw immediate changes in her. She's an older Arab mare, was a show horse. There's some stiffness going on with her, and as soon as she was out on the trail system, the stiffness was less, or actually almost disappeared, because she could move consistently. Those explosive yee-haw moments when she came out of the stall, disappeared because she was able to move all day. So how can we take that idea and make it work in the situation that we have? So she went back to the barn owner and said, can I have the paddock that is next to the arena, and when nobody is using the arena, can my horse be turned out into the arena? So they did that. Then she set up different hay nets, in the opposite corners of the stall, and then she put the water in the middle. So to give the horse the idea, I can move from here to there, to slow down the process of eating. The barn owner was willing to let her do that, which was great. We had the experience that then the barn owner actually moved over to cubes for the other horses, and Julie stayed with the hay nets, and she could observe, the behavior changes in the other horses being fed cubes twice a day versus having a hay net all the time. So the barn owner observed what was happening with the other horses, and that, Rosie stayed calm and quiet. There was no pawing, no food aggression. And so she actually now incorporated the hay nets into the other stalls. I mean, little things like that, keeping hay in front of the horse 24/7 versus feeding twice a day. Our horses are not set up to have that done. I read the other day on a Facebook ad, horses being fed twice a day, and it was, kind of listed as a pro, and I'm like, not good. That's convenient for us humans, but not good for the horse. Small digestive system. They eat and graze and eat and graze out in nature, and we literally don't need colic insurance when we start treating our horses differently, And then, of course, the idea of also interacting with my horse differently, and if my horse is stalled, to give them the opportunity to express themselves, and not to immediately, hey, we're working and we need to do this and we need to do that, to have that playful interaction with my horse and allow them I believe in a connected way. I don't believe turning out my horse into the arena and just letting get them the hee-haw out, and when, you know, they have taken care of that, then I come back in, because we need to be that herd of two. We do everything together. So if anything, if we have to get our hee-haw out, we're going to do that together in a connected way, where I then also have the opportunity to kind of shape that exuberance, you know, and have conversation about it, and use that excitement to get beautiful movement, you know?
Like the synergistic connection. So yeah, that's great. So I think what I'm taking away from that is, if you are in a situation where boarding your horse is the way that you go, to just maybe be mindful of how is the horse doing, how is the facility set up, and how might you incorporate a little bit more natural opportunities where you can, without upsetting.
Exactly. You know, look at that idea of the trail system, that the horse is consistently moving. I mean, even putting hay nets on the opposite ends of a paddock could also make a difference, instead of dropping the hay right in front of them. You know, looking at you know, if we do use hay nets, I'm really passionate about letting people know that horses by nature, they have their head down on the ground and they eat. So if we have hay nets, we want to hang them in a way where they're not up, where the horse constantly has to reach up, and we don't want to have them in a way where the horse constantly tilts its head, because we're not helping their posture if we do that.
Along those lines, what do you think of portagrazers?
You know, that's an interesting way to go about, because that is something that is on the ground, and it slows them down and it puts them in the correct position, you know. I personally, since I do have the opportunity to have a trail system, I mean, I had in Canyon City, I had a boarding facility, and there were individual stalls with runs, and there was a 6-stall barn. So I took the stalls out and created literally a trail system around those run-in shelters, and incorporated the 6-stall barn in a way where, you know, we could bring in the horses to have them groomed, or if we need to separate one because they, you know, they have something going on medically that we need to treat or something like that. And I was able to create a herd of 16 to 17 horses in a boarding environment, by just being conscious how to provide space. Obviously, if I have some coming and going, I might need to provide more space for them to be safe versus a narrow trail system, but it can be done. And again, like you said, you know, looking at what there are lots of, like the portagrazer. I mean, there you go. You don't have to build anything. You just go out and buy it, and you make a big difference for your horse already.
And they love them because they roll them around and pick them up. So I've never used one, but the horses that I've seen using them, yeah, it seems to serve the purpose of slowing down and giving them that opportunity to graze all day. But then they're super durable, so they make great play toys.
Absolutely.
So how can people learn more about natural horse habitat and how to create their own?
So I have a website. Actually have, so there's genuine connections. There's the S, because it's connection with our horse, ourselves, and others. Genuine Connections, horsemanship.com. That's where you see the whole program. And if you're specifically interested in the horse habitat, it's horsehabitat.info. And it leads to a place where people can download a planning guide, where they learn more about the ingredients and how to go about it. And I'm just in the process of adding a video series to that. But if people want more article and more information prior to downloading anything, I would suggest to go to the Genuine Connections horsemanship website, because that's where they can go into the library and other free resources and read about it and see case studies. My student friend and intern Julie is on there, where they can actually see that example, how she incorporated for her horse Rosie those principles. So that might be a fun thing to do. and you know, my property and how I'm going about right now here at Soulfire Farm to set something up from scratch. So lots of opportunity to get more free resources, and they're always welcome to email me at magic@petrachristensen.com if they have personal individual questions that they want to have answered.
So it's genuineconnections.com
Yes.
is the main site where they can go and read articles and information about that.
Genuine Connections Horsemanship.com.
genuineconnectionshorsemanship.com is where you can go and learn more about you and all of the different things that you're offering. And then the natural horse habitat.
It's just horsehabitat.info.
Okay,
That's where
perfect.
they can actually go and download the planning guide. It's 23
That's where I got
pages.
my guide. Yeah.
Where they, you know, where it's hands-on, lots of tips on how to do it. And then the library, it says right on the top, it says free resources on Genuine Connections, where people can go to the library and read more about it.
Perfect. And that's where they can actually connect you to if they wanted to talk to you or enroll in some of your courses.
Yeah, absolutely. They
Perfect.
can.
Did you have any more questions?
I think I'm good.
Well, wonderful, Petra. Thank you so much for your time and sharing this amazing idea. I remember the first time I saw it was several years ago when you were starting it in Pagosa, and I just thought, wow, what an amazing concept and a great use of a small piece of land.
Yes, that's, you know, that's it, because a lot of times we just have small piece of land, right? And to really make that work for our horses, for our pocket, because how many times do we hear, oh, it's too expensive to keep horses? I truly believe it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, yes, it's a big animal and we need to take that in consideration with feeding and with vet costs and farrier costs, but actually keeping a horse can be pocket friendly. And it can be environmentally friendly, and it can be neighbor friendly too.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and joining us here at Synergistic Horsemanship.